April 8, 1970. The Nile Delta, Bar al-Bakr, a village that exists for one reason, to feed the soil and the children who work it. Morning light cuts through the dust. It catches the rusted bell of a one-room schoolhouse. Inside, desks are arranged in rows, a wooden blackboard, chalk dust. Floating in the sunbeams, the teacher, a young woman, writes the day's lesson in Arabic. Behind her, 46 children copy the letters into their notebooks, ages 6 to 13. At 10:30 a.m., the sky does not roar, it screams. Two Israeli Phantom jets descend from the Mediterranean sun. They are low, fast, and final. The first bomb hits the playground, the second tears through the roof, the third lands in the center of the classroom. For 1 second there is silence, then the world becomes fire. When the dust settles, the schoolhouse is a crater, the blackboard is splinters, the notebooks are ash, 30 children are dead, 29 more are wounded, they're small. Bodies torn by shrapnel. A boy named Mamdouh lies in the rubble, his hands still reaching for his brother does not move. The Egyptian government will call it a massacre. Israel will call it a mistake, a target. Misidentified as a military installation, the world will debate the words, but in Bar al-Bakr there are no words, only the sound of mothers digging through the stones, only the image of a single shoe, size 3, lying in the dust. This is not the first time civilians have died in this conflict. It will not be the last. The question is not whether they die, but whether their deaths are accident or architecture. The bombs that fell on that classroom did not fall in a vacuum. They were the product of a war fought not between armies, but between populations, a war where the front line is a schoolyard, where the target is a home, where the casualty is a child. The clock reads June 1967. The world is watching. In 6 days, the map of the Middle East is rewritten. Israeli forces sweep across the Sinai, the Golan Heights, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. Arab armies lie shattered. The humiliation is absolute. For Egypt, the loss of Sinai is a wound that will not close. For Jordan, the loss of Jerusalem is a spiritual amputation. For the Palestinians, the loss of the West Bank is the loss of home, twice over. But wars do not end when the guns fall silent. They simply change shape. By 1969, the front lines have hardened into a new kind of conflict, along the Suez Canal. Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser refuses to accept defeat. He launches the war of attrition. It is not a war of grand offensives or decisive battles. It is a war of grinding. Daily violence, artillery duels across the water, commando raids under cover of darkness, snipers who count the days by the bodies they leave behind. Nasser's logic is simple. Israel is small. It cannot sustain casualties forever. If Egypt can kill 10 soldiers a day, every day, the cost will eventually become unbearable. The canal becomes a wound that bleeds slowly. Israel's response is not slow, it is overwhelming. The Israeli Air Force begins deep penetration bombing raids, not against Egyptian troops huddled in trenches along the canal, but against strategic targets deep in the Egyptian rear, bridges, factories, military bases. The goal is to make Nasser understand. You cannot hide, your capital is not safe, your home is not safe. But strategy has a shadow, and in the shadow, the lines blur. On October 24, 1969, Israeli commandos cross the Gulf of Suez. They destroy bridges and power stations. They kill Egyptian soldiers, but they also destroy civilian infrastructure, the things a population needs to live. The message is received, but the cost is counted not in military terms, but in human ones. By early 1970, Nasser travels to Moscow. He returns with something new, Soviet surface to air missiles and Soviet personnel to operate them. The rules of engagement shift. The Israeli Air Force can no longer fly with impunity. The SAM batteries create a bubble of denial over the canal zone. To break it, Israel must strike the batteries themselves. And the batteries are not in empty desert. They are placed near villages, near schools, near people. The stage is set for Bar al-Bakr. But the pattern is older than the war of attrition. It reaches back to the very founding of the state, back to the borders that were never really borders, back to the farmers and refugees who crossed them, and the men sent to stop them. The year is 1953. The place is the Jordanian border, but it is not a border in the Traditional sense, it is a line drawn on a map that cuts through olive groves, through villages, through families. After the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians become refugees. They live in camps in the West Bank, in Gaza, in Jordan, in Lebanon. But the camps are not prisons, and home, the actual village they were born in, is often just on the other side of the line. So they cross. At night, farmers slip back to their fields to harvest olives they planted decades ago. Families return to retrieve belongings hidden in walls. Young men cross to visit relatives. Some cross to steal, a very small number cross to kill. The Israeli military calls them all infiltrators, and the infiltrators, they decide, must be stopped. But how do you stop a farmer who wants his olives? How do you deter a grandmother who wants her cooking pot? Conventional border patrols cannot catch them all. So Israel develops a new doctrine, a doctrine of disproportionate response. In 1953, a young officer named Ariel Sharon is tasked with forming Unit 101. Commando unit designed not to defend the border, but to punish those who cross it. The logic is brutal. If a village harbors infiltrators or is suspected of harboring them, the village itself will pay, houses will be blown up, livestock destroyed, leaders killed. The suffering must be so severe that the villagers themselves will beg their governments to stop the infiltration. It is a strategy of terror, and it has a name: retaliation. On the night of October 14, 1953, Unit 101 crosses into the Jordanian village of Qibya. What happens there will become a template. The men move house to house. They find families huddled inside, women, children. Elderly, they order them to stay. Then they place explosives against the walls and detonate. 69 civilians die, 2/3 of them women and children. Bodies are found still embracing, a child's hand still grips a door handle. The world is horrified. The United States condemns it. The United Nations condemns it. Israel's official response is a lie. It was not the army, but enraged border settlers. But in private, the leadership understands. David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister, knows exactly what Unit 101 did, and he does not stop them, because the strategy works. Jordanian King Hussein, under pressure from his own outraged population, moves to crack down on infiltration. The message is received. The lesson of Qibya is simple. Civilian lives are currency. They can be spent to buy security. They can be sacrificed to send a message. And as long as the message is received, the cost is acceptable. This lesson does not disappear. It is passed down through generations of commanders. It is embedded in doctrine. It waits dormant for the next war, the next border, the next village. 23 years later, the same logic will be applied in Lebanon. In 1996, at Qana, Israeli artillery shells a United Nations compound where hundreds of civilians have taken shelter. Over 100 die. The explanation: Hezbollah fighters were firing from near the compound. The civilians again become the message. By 2006, the doctrine has a name: the Dahia Doctrine, named after the Beirut suburb, where Israeli bombs reduce entire apartment blocks to rubble. The stated goal: disproportionate force, the destruction of civilian infrastructure, the deliberate infliction of suffering on the population that hosts the enemy. What began in Qibya in 1953 has become official policy. And the civilians, the farmers, the children, the mothers, remain in the rubble waiting for the world to ask why. October 14, 1953, Qibya, West Bank, the village sleeps. It is a place of stone houses and narrow alleys. Families are inside, fathers who worked the fields that day, mothers who cooked the evening meal, children curled on mats. The only sound is the wind. Then the silence breaks. Israeli soldiers move through the darkness. They carry explosives. They go house to house. At each door they shout. The occupants are told to stay inside. Some try to flee. They are shot, most obey, huddling together, believing that if they do not resist, they will be safe. They are wronged. The explosions begin. One house collapses, then another, the stones fall. On the people inside, screams are swallowed by dust. By dawn, 69 bodies lie beneath the rubble. Half of them are children. A 2-year-old boy is found dead. His Mother's arm still wrapped around him. Another child's body is discovered still clutching a door handle, as if trying to open it from the inside. The survivors emerge at first light. They do not weep, they dig. The world learns the details slowly. The images are not yet television, they are words in newspapers, but the words are enough. Qibya becomes a symbol, not of war, but of something else, something that happens when soldiers are told that the enemy is everywhere and the rules are nowhere. From a military perspective, Qibya makes a kind of terrible sense. The infiltrators crossing from Jordan are a problem that conventional defense cannot solve. The border is long, the night is dark, the farmers and refugees are many. Catching them all is impossible, so the thinking shifts. Do not catch them, deter them. Deterrence requires a message, and messages in war are written in blood. The attack on Qibya is designed to be so overwhelming, so brutal, that every village along the border will hear the story. They will know what happens if an infiltrator comes. From their land, they will pressure their own governments to stop the crossings. The civilians are not the target, they are the medium. The message is transmitted through their suffering. It is not personal, it is strategic, but strategy, when applied to human bodies, has a way of forgetting that the bodies are human. Ariel Sharon, the commander of Unit 101, does not speak publicly after Qibya. He does not need to, his superiors speak for him. Moshe Dayan, the chief of staff, delivers a eulogy for a young Israeli killed by infiltrators. In it, he acknowledges the cost. He speaks of the generation of Israelis who must live by the sword. He does not apologize for Qibya. David Ben-Gurion, the prime minister, faces international condemnation. His response is a public lie. The attack was carried out by civilians, enraged by terrorism, but privately. He knows the truth, and he does not disband Unit 101. He does not court-martial Sharon. He accepts the logic, because the logic, in the cold calculus of national survival, appears to work. The men who lead Israel in these years are not monsters. They are architects. They are building a nation they believe must be strong to survive. They weigh the lives of Arab civilians against the lives of Israeli soldiers, and they make a choice. That choice echoes. By 1996, the weapons have changed: precision-guided munitions, laser designators, satellite coordinates, the ability to put a bomb through a window from 10,000 feet. But the targets remain the same. In April 1996, Israel launches Operation Grapes of Wrath against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. The goal is to stop rocket fire into northern Israel. The method is massive artillery and air bombardment. Hezbollah fighters operate from villages. They fire from among houses. The Israeli military warns civilians to flee. Many do, but some cannot. On April 18, shells hit a United Nations compound in the village of Kana. More than 100 civilians are sheltering there. They are women, children, elderly. Over 100 die. The Israeli government calls it a mistake, a targeting error, a misfired shell. But technology does not prevent tragedy. It enables it. Precision weapons allow militaries to strike deeper, harder, faster, but they do not change the fundamental reality. When you fight an enemy embedded in a population, the population dies. In 2006, the technology is even better. The bombs are smarter, but the destruction is greater. In Beirut's southern suburbs, entire apartment blocks collapse. The justification: Hezbollah's command centers are in the basements. Its rocket launchers are in the alleys. The infrastructure of the militia is woven into the infrastructure of life. And when that infrastructure is targeted, life ends. From the ground, the view is different. Hezbollah, Hamas, Palestinian militias, they do not have air forces, they do not have tanks, they have rockets and rifles, and they have the population. Their strategy is not new. It is the strategy of the weak against the strong. Embed yourself among civilians. Make the enemy choose between attacking you and protecting them. If they attack, you win the propaganda war. If they don't, you win the military one. The civilians become human shields, sometimes by choice because they support the fighters, sometimes by force because the fighters do not leave, sometimes simply by proximity because in densely populated Gaza or Beirut, there is nowhere else to go. The militias know the cost, they calculate it, they accept it, they are not innocent in the Calculus of civilian death. They place their rockets next to schools. They fire from hospitals. They store weapons in apartment buildings. They do this because it works. It constrains the enemy. It creates headlines. It generates outrage. And when the bombs fall, they stand in the rubble and point at the sky. Look what they did to us. They do not mention what they did to invite it. Both sides in this war have learned to weaponize the civilian. The Dahia Doctrine, named for the Beirut suburb destroyed in 2006, is not a secret. Israeli commanders have spoken openly about it. General Gadi Eisenkot, who would later become chief of staff, explained it plainly. We will use disproportionate force against every village from which shots are fired on Israel and cause immense damage and destruction. From our perspective, these are military bases. This is not a recommendation. This is a plan. The doctrine is clear. If Hezbollah fires from a village, the village will be destroyed, not just the launcher, not just the fighters, the village, the homes, the infrastructure, the civilians who live there. The logic is the same as Qibya, 53 years later: deterrence through destruction, message through massacre. But the moral weight has shifted. In 1953, the world condemned Qibya. In 2006, the world watched Beirut burn and the condemnation was muted. The doctrine had become normalized. The unthinkable had become policy. And the civilians, the ones who did not fire rockets, who did not join militias, who just wanted to live, remained in the crosshairs. Date August 4, 2020. Beirut, Lebanon, a city already dying. Economic collapse, political paralysis, the ghosts of civil war still walking the streets. The people of Beirut have learned to live with crisis. They queue for bread, they light candles. When the power fails, they rebuild after every explosion. But they have never seen anything like this. At 6:07 p.m., a fire breaks out at Port of Beirut, Warehouse 12, fireworks stored nearby begin to pop and crackle. Crowds gather to watch. They film on their phones. The fire spreads. It reaches a hangar. Inside the hangar, 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate, impounded 6 years earlier, left to sit forgotten except by those who knew it was there. At 6:08 p.m., the hangar explodes. The blast is one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in history. It is felt in Cyprus, 150 miles away. A mushroom cloud rises over the city. The shockwave tears through neighborhoods. Buildings collapse. Glass turns to shrapnel. People are thrown from balconies. When the dust settles, more than 200 are dead, over 7,000 wounded, 300,000 left homeless. The port, the city's lifeline, is destroyed. But this is not a bomb. This is not an airstrike. This is negligence, incompetence. Government that failed its people. For the civilians of Beirut, the source of destruction does not matter. The result is the same: rubble, grief, the search for bodies under the stones. And in the aftermath, a different kind of explosion begins. The political one. Protests erupt, rage against the leaders who let this happen. Ropes are tied around the necks of politicians' effigies. The people demand accountability. The government resigns, but the leaders do not face justice. They remain, they wait, they know the world's attention will move on. And they are right. Date March 2026. The world's eyes are elsewhere. The war with Iran has consumed the headlines, the bombing of nuclear facilities, the naval clashes in the Gulf, the diplomatic firestorms at the United Nations. The news cycle spins endlessly, focused on the big story, the global story. In the West Bank, the settlers notice. For decades, the international community has condemned Israeli settlements. For decades, the Israeli government has promised to restrain them, but restraint is a choice. And choices change when no one is watching. March 2026, the village of Abu Fala near Ramallah. It is a small place, stone houses terraced into a hillside, olive groves that have belonged to the same families for generations, a community that survives by tending the land. On a Thursday morning, they arrive. Masked men, armed, some in military-style gear, others in civilian clothes. They carry rifles. They move with purpose. They are settlers from nearby outposts, and they have come to take what they believe is theirs. The villagers try to resist. They stand in front of their homes. They plead. They shout. They throw stones. The settlers do not retreat, they open fire. Their Hamuel is 30 years old. His mother, Milia, begged him not to go. Feeling she will later say, a mother's instinct, but there went anyway, his friend's land. Was being taken, he could not stand by. He is shot in the chest. He dies on the stones his ancestors walked. Another man trying to help is overcome by tear gas. He suffocates. His body lies next to theirs. The settlers move on. They burn cars. They uproot olive trees. They spray paint stars of David on the walls of homes. By nightfall, the village is broken. In the days that follow, the pattern repeats. Across the West Bank, 1,500 Palestinians are displaced, their homes taken, their land seized, their lives uprooted. The Israeli human rights group B'Tselem issues a statement. It calls it an intensification of Israel's ethnic cleansing efforts under cover of the war. The international community condemns it quietly in press releases and diplomatic notes, but no one intervenes. No one stops them. Because the world is watching Iran, and the settlers know it. Kafr Qasim, another villager, is beaten with a club. His face is bandaged. His eyes are hollow. He speaks to a reporter. Every day there are problems. Every day the settlers establish new outposts. We are not safe from them at all. This is the climax, not a single explosion, not a single massacre, but 1,000 small destructions carried out while the world looks away, a pattern perfected over decades, now accelerated to its logical conclusion. The bombs fall, the settlers march, the civilians die. And the question hangs in the air: when does war become something else? When does it become the systematic erasure of a people from their land? The answer in March 2026 is that it already has. The numbers arrive slowly. They are always slow. Counting the dead takes time when the dead are buried under rubble. By April 2026, the toll of the Iran war is clear. Over 2,000 dead across the region. In Lebanon, at least 98 of them are children. In Iran, more than 1,200. In Israel, soldiers and civilians alike. But numbers are abstractions. The aftermath is concrete. In Bar al-Bakr, 56 years after the bombs fell, the survivors are still waiting. Ahmed el-Demiri was 8 years old on April 8, 1970. He sat in that classroom. He watched his best friend Ahmed die beside him. Shrapnel entered his own head that day. It never left. For 56 years he has carried it, metal in his skull, a daily reminder of the morning the sky fell. He lives now in a small apartment. The Egyptian government promised compensation. It never came. The Israeli government promised an investigation. It never came. The world promised to remember. It forgot. Ahmed's story is not unique. In Gaza, in Lebanon, in the West Bank, thousands like him carry the shrapnel, not always in their bodies, sometimes in their minds, the trauma passed down to children, to grandchildren, the grief that becomes an inheritance. In the West Bank, the aftermath is immediate. The village of Abu Fala tries to rebuild. The olive trees that were uprooted cannot be replanted. They were centuries old. Their roots ran deep. Now they are gone. The families who fled cannot return. Their homes are occupied by settlers. Their land is fenced off. Kafr Qasim, the man beaten with a club, sits in a clinic. His bandages are changed. Daily, the wounds will heal. The fear will not. He knows the settlers will come again. They always come again. The international community issues statements. The European Union calls settler violence unacceptable. The Arab League condemns the strikes on Beirut, Egypt, and France hold urgent diplomatic calls, but the words do not rebuild homes. They do not bring back the dead. And in Israel, the public sees it differently. They see a war for survival. They see enemies on every border. They see the force they use as necessary, as justified, as the only language their neighbors understand. Both sides carry their dead. Both sides tell their stories. Both sides believe they are the victim. The aftermath is not reconciliation. It is preparation for the next round, the next bomb, the next village. The official records tell one story. In the United Nations Security Council, resolutions are drafted. Language is debated. The United States vetoes. Russia abstains. The words are polished until they mean nothing. The Council moves on to the next crisis. In Cairo, the Arab League meets. Foreign ministers deliver speeches. They condemn. They demand, they warn, but the condemnations do not stop the bombs, the demands. Do not move the settlers. The warnings dissolve into the next news cycle. In Washington, the White House issues a statement. It calls for restraint. It urges all parties to de-escalate. It reaffirms Israel's right to self-defense. It mentions in a subordinate clause the need to protect civilian lives. The statement is forgotten by the evening news. In Tel Aviv, the government holds a press conference. The military spokesman presents evidence: Hezbollah rockets fired from civilian areas, Hamas command centers. Schools, the enemy's strategy, he explains, is to use human shields. Israel does everything it can to avoid civilian casualties, but war is war, mistakes happen. The families of the dead do not watch press conferences, they dig. In Gaza, a father pulls his daughter from the rubble. She is 7 years old, she is not moving. He holds her body and screams at the sky. There is no camera, no reporter, no one records his grief. It is just another death in a place where death has become ordinary. In Lebanon, a mother searches a hospital for her son. She goes from bed to bed, lifting sheets, looking at faces. She does not find him. She will never find him. He was in the building that collapsed. His body is still under the stones. In the West Bank, a grandmother sits among the ruins of her home. She is 92. She has been displaced 3 times in her life. First in 1948, when she fled her village. Again in 1967, when the war came. Now in 2026, by settlers with guns. She does not cry. She has no tears left. She just sits, staring at the place where her olive tree used to. But the aftermath is not a moment. It is a condition, a state of being that stretches across generations. The bombs fall, the settlers march, the world condemns, and the cycle begins again. The dead are buried, the wounded heal or don't, the survivors wait. They wait for justice, they wait for return, they wait for the world to remember. But the world has a short memory, and the next crisis is always already here. The bombs that fell on Bar al-Bakr fell 56 years ago. The children who died there would be grandparents now. If they had lived, they would have told their grandchildren about that morning, about the noise, about the dust, but they did not live. Their stories ended in a classroom that became a grave. The settlers who march through the West Bank today carry rifles and ideologies. They believe they are reclaiming a birthright. They do not see the families they displace as people with their own birthright, their own history, their own claim to the stones they walk on. The militias who fire rockets from civilian areas calculate the odds. They know the response will be devastating. They accept it, because in their calculus, the devastation serves a purpose. It creates outrage. It generates recruits. It keeps the cause alive. And the civilians, the farmers, the mothers, the children remain in the middle. They did not choose this war. They did not fire the rockets. They did not vote for the settlers. They simply lived where they were born, in houses their ancestors built, on land their families worked for generations. In modern warfare, the battlefield is everywhere. There is no front line. There is no safe rear. The enemy is among the population, and so the population becomes the target. Not always by intention, often by accident, but accident repeated enough times becomes pattern, and pattern repeated enough times becomes policy. The names change: Qibya, Bar al-Bakr, Kana, Gaza, Beirut, Abu Fala. The technology changes: rifles, jets, precision bombs, drones. The justifications change: retaliation, deterrence, self-defense, the war on terror. But the rubble remains the same. The grief remains the same. The small belongings, the shoe, the notebook, the photograph remain in the dust, waiting for someone to pick them up. History will record the battles, the strategies, the political decisions. It will count the dead and argue over the numbers. It will assign blame and praise according to the loyalties of the historian. But for the civilians, history is not a record. It is a weight. It is the shrapnel in Ahmed El Demiri's head carried for 56 years. It is the grandmother staring at the empty space where her olive tree used to be. It is the mother searching hospital beds for a son she will never find. The conflict continues. The bombs continue. The settlers continue. The world watches, condemns, and moves on. And in the villages, in the cities, in the refugee camps, the civilians wait. They wait for the whisper of bombs to stop. They wait for the dust to settle. They wait for someone to remember that they are not targets. They are not messages. They are not currency in a war they did not choose. They are people, and people in the end are all that history really is.